She has excessive love and care towards her family, and that is the reason she has spoiled her two children and also her husband. So Annie is very scared, but later Mrs. Fitzgerald assures that this change is temporary and this can be reversible because the children and husband are willing to do whatever Mrs. Annie Pearson suggests. Hello everyone. A very warm welcome to all the young minds of class 11 CBSE. I am Dr. Shalini, your English teacher at Prep School. Today we are here to understand one of the lessons from your snapshots, that is Mother's Day. This is a very wonderful lesson here. So let us see what is there in today's session. We'll understand about the author first, we'll understand about the theme next, then we'll move on to the characters. At last we go to the summary. So let us start with the introduction of the author. So this story is written by J.B. Priestley. He was an English author. He was a novelist, playwright, poet. He was also a screenwriter, broadcaster, and also he was a social commentator. So many roles to play. Many of his plays are actually structured around the time slip. Okay, and he went on to develop a new theory of time, something like a time machine kind. So he just wrote about it, most of his plays with different dimensions that think past, present and future. So all these three things he brought up in his time slip stories. So he was such a writer. His Yorkshire background, that is the place where he stayed, so that actually is reflected in much of his fictions. Okay, so mostly in this Good Companions, so that story, too much of Yorkshire you can see over here. So let us now move on to the theme of the story. So this is a humorous play. This portrays the status of a mother in the family. Okay, so Mrs. Annie Pearson was the mother there and she was not treated well by her husband and children. So with the help of her neighbor, Mrs. Fitzgerald, she gets a magic spell. They exchange their personalities temporarily and she gets to be treated well by her family members. She actually stands up for her rights because of that magic spell. So Mrs. Annie Pearson's family is shocked to see the change in her and they agree to behave properly with her. So she gets that respect what she deserves in the end. So this is the story. This is the one-liner I have told you about the summary of the story. We'll now move on to the characters of the story. The first person we need to understand is Mrs. Fitzgerald. So Fitzgerald is Mrs. Annie Pearson's neighbor. She is quite strong-willed and also she knew magic. She had learned when she was in the West. So she helps Mrs. Annie Pearson to perform that, to reform that spoiled members, and this helps Annie Pearson's family. Okay, so they get reformed and they start respecting the mother in that family. So that is Mrs. Fitzgerald. And next is Mrs. Annie Pearson. So she is the mother in that story. She is very pleasant but very nervous kind of a woman. She has excessive love and care towards her family, and that is the reason she has spoiled her two children and also her husband. So whatever they want, she just goes and does it to the place where they were. So that's the reason they have been pampered, and she herself has spoiled the family members and now she is regretting for that. Next we have Doris Pearson. Doris Pearson is Mrs. Annie Pearson's daughter who is around 20 years old, and she fails to understand her mother's struggle in the household work. She doesn't even help her mother in carrying out the daily chores. Next we have Cyril Pearson. Cyril Pearson is Annie Pearson's son. Okay, so he is also equally demanding and he never sympathizes with his mother's work. Okay, so he has taken mother for granted. Okay, then we have Mrs. George Pearson. Mrs. George Pearson is Annie Pearson's proud husband. He is very proud. He has lot of pride in him, lot of attitude, what you call it as. Okay, so he is not respected in society as he expects. So he dominates his wife in the club where he goes to play and all. So he is a member there. Okay, so there also he is not respected only because he dominates his wife. So these are the characters of the story. Let us now begin with the story here. So Mrs. Annie Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald, they both are sitting and talking. So this is what the story opens with. Okay, so that is the opening scene of the story here. So Mrs. Annie Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald, the next door neighbors they are. Okay, so what happens, Annie is a pleasant and a nervous looking person. As I said, she is not as strong willed as this Fitzgerald is. Okay, so now they both are opposite in their characters. So Annie has a very soft voice, whereas Fitzgerald has a very deep and strong voice here. So throaty voice in the sense, very dominating kind of voice. So Mrs. Fitzgerald is actually a fortune teller. She has learnt it when she had gone to the east. Okay, so when she was there, she has learnt this fortune telling. Now she is reading Annie's fortune here. Okay, she is trying to tell what Annie is going through there. So she advises Annie to be strict with her family members. Okay, so if at all she has to become the boss in the family, if she has to lead the family, then she should be very strict, is what Mrs. Fitzgerald says. So actually Annie is not treated well by her family. So how she is treated, we get to know when we read the lesson. Okay. So at present, Mrs. Annie Pearson has been reduced to the status of a person. I mean, you can also call it as a maid. Okay, a maid without being paid. Okay, so maid without pay is what Annie Pearson is like in her house. Okay, so this is the situation of Mrs. Annie Pearson. Mrs. Fitzgerald is very angry about it. Okay, she could not tolerate that her friend has been working like this and the way Annie is treated. So she gets very angry. One day she suggests that they should temporarily exchange their personalities, okay, by using a magic spell. Since she knows magic, she suggests Annie Pearson to get the personalities exchanged. Okay, she and Annie Pearson should exchange the personality and she would use that magic spell which she learnt in the East. In the beginning, Annie Pearson doesn't agree, but after Mrs. Fitzgerald says that it is temporary, then she agrees there. So she takes Annie's hand and she speaks some magic words there. So a transformation takes place, they just fall down and they get back and their personalities are exchanged. That means Mrs. Fitzgerald shifts into the body of Annie and Annie's personality gets shifted to Mrs. Fitzgerald's. So Annie is very scared, but later Mrs. Fitzgerald assures that this change is temporary and this can be reversible. So she agrees, she is at peace now. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald, now who is in the body of Annie Pearson, she stays at Annie's place there. She sends Annie, that is Annie who is there in Fitzgerald's body, she sends her to her house where she can relax for some time. Both their personalities are exchanged, but their characteristics cannot change. Okay, so now let us see what happens. The real twist is here. So Doris comes there. This Annie Pearson is there. I mean to say Mrs. Fitzgerald is there. She has been drinking and she has been playing cards. So this is the situation. She is just sitting on the chair at the table and she is doing this. Now Doris, that is daughter of Annie Pearson, who is 20 years old, she enters the house. Then she gets a shock seeing her mother playing cards and drinking. So she is worried. She is also smoking. Mother is also smoking, wherein she had no habit of all these. So she is shocked at it now. Now, whatever, Doris doesn't worry much about it. She just gets a shock, but later she just talks to Annie Pearson about her yellow dress. But Annie Pearson doesn't respond at all. She doesn't respond at all. She was like, if you want, you can take it. So she was least bothered about what Doris is asking. She asks for tea. Doris asks for tea, but mother answers very rudely. That is, Mrs. Fitzgerald answers very rudely, telling her to iron the dress herself. So she doesn't care about the dress. She doesn't care about the tea also. And she tells that if you want to make tea, it is not ready, you can make it by yourself, is what she says. Okay, so now Doris is actually shocked again, because the second answer she has given it like that. Okay, so Doris gets angry now, but she gets a good scolding from her mother. She tries to back answer her mother, but she gets a proper scolding from her mother. So Doris just shuts her mouth and keeps quiet. Then what happens? Annie starts making fun of the boyfriend of Doris, that is Charlie Spence, because he had a projecting teeth and he was very stupid. So this boyfriend of Doris, that is Charlie, is very stupid. Okay, so she also says that at her age, that means when Annie Pearson was young, she would have chosen a very handsome person, very clever person who was fit to be a boyfriend of hers. So she mocks like that in that way, and she says she would have chosen somebody who is better than this Charlie. So Doris obviously gets frustrated. This strange behavior of her mother frustrates Doris, and she leaves the room crying. So she just starts weeping and she leaves the room. Then what happens? Cyril enters. Okay, so Cyril, who is Annie's son, enters the house. He also asks for tea, and then he's in a very demanding mood and also in angry manner. So that time Annie tells him that she has not prepared the tea at all. Okay, if you want, you can prepare by yourself. I have not prepared tea, is what the same answer she gives Cyril also, what she told Doris. Now Cyril asks her if everything is all right with her. She replies that she has never felt better in her life. That means before also nothing was all right. Now also nothing is all right. I have never felt better at all in my life, is what she says. Now Cyril inquires why she has not got the tea ready. Now Annie says that she wanted a change. Like, I wanted a change, that's why I have not prepared the tea. So I am not going to make the tea also, is what she says. So she answers in the way they were talking to her before. Then what happens? Cyril announces that is he is running short of time, so he should get the tea ready immediately. Now he just tells the mother that I am running short of time, I want this tea ready immediately, he says, but she is not ready to do it. Cyril also inquires the mother whether the clothes are ready. He was supposed to go out somewhere. He asks the mother whether the clothes are ready. Now you should imagine what and all are the works that Mrs. Pearson used to do over here. Getting the children's clothes ready who are old enough to get their work done by themselves. Okay, she is 20 years old. So Cyril, his age is not known here. Probably he is around 20 or 22 there. Okay, so he is his age is not mentioned. So he is also old enough to get the things done. Okay, so for them, such people, she is working without any regards at all. So you can imagine that. So his clothes also was not ready, but she says no. Okay, Fitzgerald says no, and he gets anguished. Anguished means he gets more angry. Okay, so now he asks his mother what will happen if they talked the way she was talking that day. How would you feel the way you talk if we talk the same way? So that time she tells that, Annie coldly replies that all three of them always talk to her like that. So what is wrong with her talking the same tone? So she reminds the people there that you were also talking the same way I am giving it back to you. It's not that you are going to talk to me like that. It is the way you were talking before, I am just giving it back to you, is what she says. So she also says that if he doesn't want to do anything at home, he doesn't have to. If you don't want to do anything, fine, don't do it, is what she says. So she also tells that she has become a member of the union. Okay, so that she gets what she deserves. So usually when people do not get their rights properly, so that time they get into some union protest and all, right? So she also tells the same thing. Now I'm a member of union, now whatever I deserve, I should be getting it, is what she says. So Doris appears again on the scene wearing a shoulder wrap. So she just is wearing a shoulder wrap and she comes there. Annie remarks sarcastically. Okay, she just mocks her about her dress there. So there an argument starts between this Doris and Annie, that is mother and daughter. They start arguing now. Then Doris comments that if she was looking awful, it was due to her mother only. Okay, because she was the one who made her cry. So because the mother made her cry, she started crying and she was looking awful, means she was not looking beautiful. So then Annie asks if any strong beer was left. So she was drinking beer. Okay, that stout is the word they mentioned there. So she asks if the beer was left there. And Cyril also is shocked to know that his mother wants to drink. So he is horrified now. He is unable to understand what is going on. So everything is in a mess. Okay, so now nobody is able to understand what is going on over here. Next, what happens? Both Doris and Cyril are actually filled with horror. They are scared now. They are filled with shock whether to talk with the mother or not. So this mother's behavior is what has made them shocked. Both wonder what has happened to their mother. So they start wondering what is wrong with their mother. So Doris thinks she has got hit on her head by something. Maybe she has gone and banged somewhere, so her behavior has changed. She has gone crazy, so her behavior has changed is what she thinks. Then she also says that the manner in which her mother spoke hurt her the most and made her cry. So the way the mother spoke actually hurt her a lot, and that is what made her cry, she says. Then both the siblings, Doris and Cyril, they start giggling at the thought of how will the father come and behave like this. Okay, so if mother keeps behaving like this only, how will the father feel? So now they are thinking about their father. Okay, so next what happens? Father also has to face the music. So Annie remarks that it was high time they grew up. So she tells that it is high time you grow up now, you better do your things by yourself, she says. Now Doris asked if they had done something wrong. Okay, she is asking what was their mistake with Annie. Then she tells that actually her children and her husband's behavior was the one which bothered her the most. So now Annie tells that yes, the way you behave with me is what is hurting me more. That is what is worrying me more, she says. So they always came, asked for something and went without any regard. So she tells it out. She speaks her heart out there. Okay. So why is it that she is behaving like this? Why was she worried? All these she tells there. Okay, nobody was bothered whether she wants to go out or how she was feeling or what help does she need. Nothing at all they were talking. Okay, so they were all just bothered about themselves. They were least bothered about the person who is taking care of all of them. So she always did her best to keep everybody happy. But all of them were not at all bothered about her. So now she is very clearly put across what she is feeling about the family members. Then Annie also tells that while three of them do a job, okay, or maybe from morning till evening, that is 8 hours a day, they work outside. So with 2 days off in a weekend, they get 2 days off in a weekend also. But she is a person who goes on round the clock. Okay, so she works from morning till night, not even 8 hours, more than that also. Okay, she doesn't even get a break, and also she doesn't get week offs also. Okay, so every weekend she doesn't get any off also is what she tells them. So Doris is really worried about what will happen if her mother takes a holiday on weekends. So she is worried now. Now she is talking about the weekend. So suppose her mother takes off on weekends, what is going to happen to us is what she thinks. So Annie tells Doris that time that she would do some work on Saturday and Sunday. That means the mother is going to do some work on the weekends only when she is requested for it and thanked for whatever she does. So she has decided to take week offs on the weekends, and only on those 2 days, if at all the family members request her to do something, then only she is ready to take up 1 or 2 works. Otherwise she is going to take complete off over there is what Annie says. So she also tells that she might also go on an outing during the weekends because she was fed up of staying at house for many years. So none of them was ever bothered to take her out. They went on outings for weekends, but nobody bothered about taking her to an outing. So she tells that also. Now I am going to live how I want. I am going to go out also on weekends is what she says. Mr. George Pearson enters the scene. He enters the house. He is about 50 years old, and he considers himself as a very important person in the society. Okay, so that is because he was the member of a union there. So he gets annoyed by the way his wife is behaving, and she was actually sipping beer as he enters the house. So he was also shocked the way the wife is behaving. So he tells her that he does not want any tea because he was supposed to go out somewhere. Okay, so he was supposed to go out somewhere, so he doesn't need tea at all since he doesn't have time and all. So he is going out for supper at his club. So his wife tells him that she has not prepared tea anyhow. Okay, so there is no necessity for him to worry because she has not at all prepared tea there. So he is worried about that also. Because of this, George gets annoyed. So his wife is not even bothered to prepare tea. She doesn't even bother to ask if tea is required or not. So it just worries him. He gets angry actually. So she continues to make him more angry. She rebukes him and she tells him that he is not respected in the club where he keeps going there. So you go to the club, nobody respects you there because people think you are very proud person. So she tells him that at the club where he goes, they call him as Pompey Ompy Pearson, because he is a person who is very much bothered about himself. Okay, so he has too much of pride and he is self-interested only. Okay, so he thinks he is the most important person, and that's the reason nobody respects him because of his behavior now. So then Annie tells his son that sometimes it does people good to have their feelings hurt. So if somebody hurts their feeling, then it is good for them to change, is what she says there. So she tells her son, that is Cyril. On hearing a knock, Cyril checks who it is and comes back and tells that it is Mrs. Fitzgerald who has come. Now you know the personalities have exchanged. Now Annie is there in Fitzgerald's body. Here Fitzgerald is there in Annie's body. So the person who has come will appear as Fitzgerald only. So he tells that it is Fitzgerald, and Annie tells him that yes, let her come inside. So now Fitzgerald is a person who witnesses whatever is happening in Annie's house. Okay, so from before it is like that. So now Mrs. Fitzgerald, that is actually Mrs. Annie Pearson, so she enters and finds this Doris in tears. So she is very worried why Doris is in tears. Now her family continues to get scolding in front of her too. That is, even in front of Mrs. Fitzgerald, this family continuously starts getting scoldings. Means all three of them, she is being scolded by Mrs. Annie Pearson even in front of Mrs. Fitzgerald. So Mrs. Annie Pearson, actually that is Mrs. Fitzgerald, so informs that she was putting everyone in their place. So now they both only know that. Okay, so they say that now everybody is going to be in their places. Now Mrs. Fitzgerald has been showing everybody their own places. Mr. George Pearson shouts at his wife. Okay, so that time she threatens to slap his big fat silly face. So this is how she reacts to her husband. Okay, so he shouts at her, she shouts back at him. She tells, I'm going to slap your big silly face. He also gets offended. He just keeps quiet. The real Mrs. Annie Pearson now gets really disturbed and wants everyone to leave. Okay, so now Mrs. Fitzgerald, who has come, she wanted everybody to leave because she just wants to talk to the real Fitzgerald to exchange the personality. So she feels that it is too much. Then she tells everybody to leave, and also she tells Mrs. Fitzgerald that enough is enough. After everybody leaves, so only they both talk to each other. So Mrs. Annie Pearson tells everybody to leave, just locking the house. Okay, so she tells everything will be fine when you come back. So you leave for good now, is what she says. So after that, she wanted them to change back. Okay, their personality had to be exchanged. So Mrs. Fitzgerald again speaks some magic words and they revert back to their personalities. So now Mrs. Fitzgerald says that she enjoyed every moment in her changed personality. So she has done a lot for Mrs. Annie. She has enjoyed a lot with her new personality, and Annie remarks that she did not enjoy this change because she was worried only always. She could not relax at her house, but she was too worried about what was going on at her house. Mrs. Fitzgerald wanted Annie not to be very soft to her family. Okay, now Mrs. Fitzgerald has given a start. So Annie had to continue that. Okay, so that is what she advises her. She wanted Annie to remain firm with her family. So Annie says that she will be able to manage her family very well now. Okay, so Mrs. Fitzgerald actually didn't want her to go and apologize, because if at all she apologizes, so whatever was done till now is gone. Okay, that would be gone as a waste, she says, and she tells that again they'll start treating her very indifferently. So you have to take a proper stand, is what she says. So she had to wear a tough look. Okay, Mrs. Annie Pearson had to wear a tough look and also talk to them very rudely if she wanted them to behave in a right way. That is, till now how Mrs. Fitzgerald has behaved, like that only now Annie had to continue her behavior. Okay, so for a change, when Annie smiles, the family members also smile. Now they come back to their house. Now the personality has changed. Mrs. Fitzgerald has given some advice and she leaves. Now what happens? for a change, when Annie smiles at her family members, they also smile back and feel very relaxed. So they had cancelled going out because Annie feels that all the family members, they should play a game of rummy. Now they all say that whatever you want to do, we agree to that. We are ready to do that. So she tells now everybody will cancel going out and they will play a game of rummy all together. Let us have a family time, she says. So everybody agrees for that. She also asks her children to prepare supper for the family. Okay, so for which they readily agree. Now they are ready to do anything for her. Okay, so they are going to prepare dinner now. So she also wanted to have a talk with George, that is her husband. So for which everybody agrees. Now they go prepare the supper there. These both will sit and chat for a while is what she decides. So the play, that is this drama, that is this whole story ends on a happy note. Now everything is fine because the children and husband are willing to do whatever Mrs. Annie Pearson suggests. So she gets up, she talks for her rights and she gets whatever she wants. So whatever Annie Pearson requests for, whatever she suggests, they are ready to do that for her. Okay, so this was the summary of Mother's Day. A very apt title is given by the author. So what I suggest, please go through the video, then read the story. You will understand it very well and you will enjoy reading it also. Okay, so let us come back and discuss the question answers during the live session. Thank you for your time. Let us meet again in a very interesting topic next. So take care, keep learning. Bye-bye. See you soon.